Before we begin, take a second to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment with the next topic you want to see explored here. Another empire, a forgotten battle, a lost city. Your idea might shape the next journey. Now let's step onto the stones of a very old road and begin. Listen closely. Beneath your feet is a road laid down by hands that have turned to dust. Its stones are bruised by centuries of footsteps and horse hooves, by the steel rims of chariots and the sandals of soldiers who marched so far, they forgot where their marching started. This road is not just a path. It is a promise made by a people who believed that order could be wrestled from chaos, that laws could outlast kings, that a citizen could carry his rights across mountains, seas, and deserts and still be recognized. Rome did not simply conquer, it connected. It did not simply reign, it endured. This is the story of why Rome was the greatest empire, not only for the lands it amassed or the battles it won, but for the systems it forged, the institutions it refined, and the idea it carried across the ages, that stone, law, and citizenship could bind the world tighter than fear. Close your eyes and smell the river, mud of the Tiber. We begin on a hillside that was once unremarkable, a cluster of huts and smoke, traders and thieves, shepherds and refugees. Rome is a legend and a ledger, a myth and a memo. Its earliest years are folded in stories, twin infants suckled by a wolf, a quarrel between brothers, omens in the sky. But behind the myths lay a real problem. How do you forge a people from those who have none? Rome's first miracle wasn't military. It was civic. It took the unwanted, the exiles, the dispossessed, the risk-takers, and taught them that belonging could be built. A ditch, a wall, a forum, a promise. The walls could be breached. The promise could not. If you worked, if you fought, if you swore to the community would be yours. From the start, Rome learned from others without shame. The Etruscans taught it ritual and engineering. The Greeks taught it ships and stories, geometry, and gods with many names. The Latins taught it how to live in a crowded neighborhood and not lose your identity. Rome was a learner that became a teacher. It borrowed the alphabet, then wrote laws that would travel farther than any alphabet had gone. It borrowed the phalanx, then broke it apart into a machine of moving parts. It borrowed myths, then minted them into marble. Because Rome, more than any other empire, discovered the alchemy of taking foreign and turning it into Roman. The Republic is where the crucible hardened. Imagine a city where kings had been expelled not long ago, where the memory of a tyrant cutting off the heads of poppies still prickled the skin of the people. They would not risk a single man holding too much power again. So they divided power like a clever wall divides fire, consuls with short terms and mutual vetoes, a senate that could advise and restrain, assemblies where citizens, real people, dusty and loud, could vote, magistrates with limited tasks and limited time. In moments of mortal danger, a dictator could be appointed, but only for 6 months, because even urgency has to obey the law. No system is perfect, and Rome's was riddled with class conflict and human ambition. But it was a system with levers, gears, and counterweights. It was a machine that, for centuries, outlasted the men who wound it. Now picture the sand of a road grinding under hobnailed boots. The Roman legion was not simply an army, it was a thinking tool. The Greeks fought in tight walls of spears. The Romans took that wall and hinged it. The legion was modular, cohorts and centuries, units that could pivot, absorb, and strike. It was the military expression of Rome's civic genius, flexible, disciplined, standardized. A Roman soldier could be plucked from the olive groves of Umbria or the valleys of Gaul, put into a line with strangers, and still move like part of a single body. Their training was repetition until instinct replaced thought. Their advantage wasn't ferocity. It was the decision to learn from defeat. When Pyrrhus beat them, they adapted. When Hannibal humiliated them at Cannae, they refused to die. They bled, reorganized, and returned to the field with a colder mind. The legions won not because they never lost, but because losing taught them more than winning did. Follow one legion down a cobbled road. This is where Rome's particular greatness shows its true face, the road itself. Straight when it could be, patient when it could not, layered with gravel and stone, crowned to shed water, edged with ditches, maintained by a bureaucracy that knew a pothole could become a defeat. Roads let armies move, yes, but they also let merchants move, ideas move, letters move, the law itself move. The Via Appia, the Via Flaminia, the straight lines across swamps and hills, these were not merely military arteries. They were the circulatory system of an imperial body. Along these roads, milestones spoke in the language of certainty. From here to there, so many miles, measured by the same unit from Britain to Judea. An empire that imposes a unit of measure is one that intends to make strangers legible to one another. The water followed. Aqueducts stepped down from distant springs with mathematical calm. Arches lifted water where the earth fell away. Lead pipes snaked through walls and stone gutters, distributing a miracle that became mundane. Public fountains always flowing, baths steaming, latrines flushing, sewers swallowing what cities could not keep. This was not charity. It was control. Clean water pacified cities, organized crowds, and taught citizens that the state, invisible but real, could turn hills into rivers and drought into a bath. Concrete, the quiet Roman superpower set underwater, hardened in darkness, clung to brick and stone and broke the tyranny of cut blocks. With concrete, Rome's builders didn't merely assemble. They poured. Vaults opened new spaces, domes turned light into geometry, amphitheaters multiplied sightlines so 50,000 souls could share a single spectacle. But you cannot build an eternal city from stone alone. You need law. Rome's law began as the 12 Tables, a plain language code hammered out to prevent the noble born from keeping justice behind the curtain. Then came the praetors with their edicts, adjusting rules case by case as life outpaced the letter. Jurists, thinkers who turned disputes into principles, refined those rules into a system that would travel intact into later centuries. Property and contract, torts and inheritance, status and procedure. In Rome, law was not a sermon. It was an argument. It acknowledged custom and bent slowly toward universality, not because it was idealistic, but because an empire sitting across continents needed consistency more than it needed novelty. If a merchant from Alexandria could trust a contract in Massilia, that was power. If a widow in Hispania could appeal against a corrupt magistrate and be heard in Rome, that was power. Law made citizens legible across space and time. Citizenship itself was a Roman masterpiece. It began as a small club free men of the city and its immediate neighbors. Then Rome did something both pragmatic and visionary. It made citizenship a tool. Allies who fought beside Rome could earn degrees of status. Communities that resisted could be punished yet eventually brought inside. Soldiers from the provinces could claim, at the end of their service, that hard-won, golden status, the legal identity that made the empire less a quilt and more a single cloth. Over centuries this widened, culminating in an edict that flung open the doors. Free inhabitants across the empire transformed into citizens with obligations and privileges that bound them to a center they might never see. Think of that gesture. Not a badge handed out for sentiment, but a unifying act that turned taxation, law, and military service into parts of a single civic identity. Now go to sea. The Mediterranean, once a scatter of coasts, became a Roman lake Mare Nostrum. Grain from Egypt fed the bellies of Rome. Oil from Hispania lit its lamps and flavored its food. Garum from Baetica stung the air with its salty rot and savory lure. Glass from Syria caught the light on a patrician table. Marble from Greece polished the memory of poets into walls. Lumber from the Alps rose into cranes and scaffolds. Coinage traveled through these routes like 1,000 small promises. The denarius was not simply metal. It was trust minted into a token you could carry from a Gallic market to a Judean port. Ports swelled into planned harbors. Lighthouses beamed in steady rhythms. And warehouses stacked amphorae in geometries as precise as any phalanx. Merchants counted years not by harvest alone, but by sailing seasons, by the predictable pattern of winds that the state understood and secured as a matter of policy. Listen to the city awake. A street seller sings the price of figs. A baker breaks open a new loaf, and the smell jostles your hunger. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer marks a rhythm older than empire. Children chase each other through the forest of columns. Graffiti funny, cruel, tender fills the walls with the heartbeat of the anonymous. An advocate, sweat beating at his temple, prepares to speak before a magistrate. A matron in a shaded atrium signs a contract for a shipping venture. A freedman counts the day's takings and whispers a prayer to Mercury. The empire was not only senators and warriors. It was porters and sailors, prostitutes and teachers, bakers and bricklayers, painters and potters. In its cities, the empire became a habit, a set of expectations. Water on demand, bread at market, baths by afternoon, news on walls, crowds entertained, disputes processed, funerals carried out with dignity. These expectations, once granted, became a kind of oath the state swore and had to keep. Now turn to the provinces. Rome learned to rule at scale. It appointed governors with defined terms and defined constraints. Did corruption exist? Of course, but there were audits, inspectors, roads for complaints as well as troops. A centurion might be feared, but a governor knew a lawsuit could chase him back to Rome. Census takers compiled lists of lives. Taxes were assessed with a bureaucratic habit that, while imperfect, was at least legible. The empire's genius was that it could be both rigid and accommodating. A network of towns ruled themselves by their own customs, so long as the flow of taxes and loyalty kept steady. Local elites, ambitious men with marble dreams, were invited into the imperial story. Build a bathhouse, endow a temple, pave a forum, and your name would cling to the stone. In return, Rome asked for order. The best propaganda the empire ever produced was not an edict or a speech. It was a square with shade, a fountain that did not run dry, a legal system that bore at least a family resemblance from one end of the empire to the other. Of course, empire is never simply a story of builders and laws. It is also the story of those who resist. Hear the leather drumbeats of legions marching into Gaul, the crack of whips as roads cut through forests sacred to people whose gods did not migrate easily. Hear the shouts of rebels who would not be folded into other people's maps. Rome could be merciless. It crucified. It burned. It razed cities to the ground and salted memory into soil. To say Rome was the greatest is not to say it was gentle. It is to say that it understood power in a way that outlived its cruelty. Its roads outlasted its punishments. Its laws outlasted its lash. When it subdued, it also offered. When it punished, it sometimes forgave. Prisoners could become citizens. Rebels could become senators, gradually, with time and compromise. This, too, was power, the ability to metabolize enemies into allies, to turn resistance into representation. Now bring your ear to the Senate's marble steps and hear what thundered across those stones. Ambition. Names like Marius and Sulla, Pompey and Caesar, Antony and Octavian, men who saw that the Republic's checks could be tested, bent, and broken. Civil war is a fever that tests a political body. Rome burned with it more than once. And yet, even as armies fought Romans on Romans, the machine of empire kept humming. Granaries still opened. Papers were still stamped. Aqueducts were still maintained. Why? Because Rome had built redundancy into itself. Its power did not sit in a single throne. It lay in habits, in countless trained hands, in offices that could be filled by the next person who knew how to read, count, and command. When Octavian, remade as Augustus, became the first emperor, the Republic did not die with a scream. It exhaled and reorganized. Augustus learned to wear power lightly, to keep the old names consul, senate, people while concentrating the essential levers in his own hands. He presented stability and sold it as a restoration. The deal he offered to the exhausted world was simple: peace for power, Pax Romana. The words sound like marble, cool, smooth, seemingly permanent. For 2 centuries, give or take, the empire stretched taut but unbroken from the Atlantic to the Euphrates, from the dunes of Africa to the damp hills of Britain. Along its lines, the bristling borders of forts and watchtowers, soldiers watched forests and deserts where other maps started. Inside, cities flowered like seeds in a well-watered garden. Towns that once scraped by now built theaters and baths, minted coins with emperors' profiles, sent their sons to train for rhetoric or soldiering, and learned to sue rather than stab. Regional gods learned Latin names. Local myths coaxed Roman respect by claiming a shared antiquity. The empire was not a monolith, it was a chorus. Yet the chorus sang in tune often enough to be heard as one. Watch emperors succeed and fail. Some were competent caretakers. Hadrian, who walked the borders, shored up walls, asked how long a bridge would stand rather than how quickly it could be built. Trajan, who pushed outward with energy and brought back the wealth of new conquests and the humility of a builder who needed engineers more than flatterers. Antoninus Pius, who governed like a patient father. Marcus Aurelius, who tried to think his way to virtue while camped in the cold, writing meditations as if he could make philosophy keep him warm. Others were monsters or fools. Caligula's caprice, Nero's vanity, Commodus's play-acting cruelty. Yet the marvel remains. Even under fools, the aqueducts still ran. Even under monsters, the roads were patrolled. A system that could survive incompetence was a system built for time. In time, everything is challenged. Plagues rode the roads that trade had made, shrinking populations and fraying confidence. Enemies learned Roman habits, copied Roman weapons, built their own confederations, pressed harder on the borders. Internal struggles for succession shook the empire like an oak in a storm. The 3rd century staggered with crises: 20 emperors in 50 years, usurpers claiming legitimacy with the ink still wet on their proclamations. But watch again what Rome did when under threat. It reorganized. Diocletian carved governance into manageable pieces, a tetrarchy of shared rule that tried to tame the chaos of distant frontiers and keep the hierarchies responsive. Taxes were recalculated, armies were reformed. New capitals swelled in strategic places. And then Constantine, reading gods and politics like auguries on the wind, rationalized another truth: the empire's center could move. He refounded a city on the Bosporus and called it a new Rome, a bridge between continents, a gatekeeper to trade, a citadel for the centuries to come. Religion, too, reshaped the imperial mind. In cities where gods had always shared space like neighbors, a new faith grew from the eastern edges of the empire, bringing with it a demand not for a place in the Pantheon, but for a redefinition of truth. At first, the empire tried to swat this faith away, seeing disloyalty in refusal. But the stubbornness of martyrs is a political force. When the faith spread across social lines and into the heart of the army, the state read the tea leaves and changed its approach from persecution to toleration, from toleration to patronage. A Christian empire learned to put bishops beside governors, synods beside senates. And yet, the Roman habits remained. Councils argued and codified. Laws absorbed theology into statute. Administrators organized the unorganizable. The empire bent without snapping. But history hardens. The western part of the empire, dragged by demographic shifts, economic strain, political miscalculations, and the centrifugal pull of local power, crumbled into kingdoms that still called themselves Romane long after Roman tax registers vanished. In the East, the empire endured. A Greek-speaking Rome that guarded the legal and architectural inheritance like a flame in a glass. Even when the word emperor crossed the Alps to a new claimant crowned in a northern church, the idea he claimed was Roman. Caesar became Kaiser, then Tsar. Latin law informed the customs of cities that had never felt a legion's shadow. Roads that Roman surveyors laid became foundations for medieval trade routes and modern highways. Language changed, but the bones of Roman thinking remained, shaped into Romance tongues that still, every day, shape our mouths to old forms. So why was Rome the greatest empire? You can count square miles and populations if you like. You can list victories. You can sketch a map on a chalkboard and admire how far it stretches. But the true answer is this: Rome discovered, built, and refined an infrastructure of belonging. It made the state visible and useful in everyday life. It took the abstract law, citizenship, obligation, and made it as tangible as a stone you could step on, as wet as the water that filled your cup. It mastered durability, in roads that outlived dynasties, in legal arguments that still constrain judges, in bricks that hold their shape under stranger skies. It balanced the local and the imperial, the proud memory of cities older than Rome with the universal habit of Roman administration, and it made its power seductive. To be conquered by Rome could mean slavery and ruin. It could also mean theaters, baths, security, and the right to sue a governor. Many empires could take. Rome learned how to give in ways that made loyalty profitable. Let us walk a little longer, step by step, across a day in the life of the empire to watch the ordinary genius at work. Dawn spills across the tiled roofs of a provincial town, say. In southern Gaul, the local magistrates open the basilica doors. Scribes already sit at their tables, styluses and wax tablets ready. A farmer arrives, hat in hand, to register a lease on a plot of land. He knows the procedure because it is posted. The clerk knows which fee to collect because the scale is standard. A merchant brings a dispute. His shipment of Spanish oil arrived with amphorae cracked and leaking. The court hears the case. The law of carriage applies. Precedents guide judgment, not good intentions rules. Across the square, a mason negotiates with a city official to repair a fountain. Payment will come from funds set aside for public works, managed by men rotated through office according to tradition and statute. In the afternoon, youths recite lines from Virgil, learning not only the language, but a story of who they are within a world larger than their hills. Near dusk, a patrol from the local cohort makes its loop, their presence a quiet discouragement to anyone who might think to settle a score with a knife. The city breathes in confidence. This is what Rome did. It turned one day after another into a pattern that people could trust. Across the empire, similar days played out in towns with other gods, other food, other songs. In Judea, heated debates about law and identity unfolded under the same Roman sky, with Roman standards casting their shadows across the temple's stones. In Britain, rain slicked the timber palisades and stone miles of Hadrian's Wall as soldiers warmed their hands and watched for movement in the mist. In Africa Proconsularis, the sun stared down at cities rich with grain, their mosaics shimmering with blues and golds. In Syria, caravans thudded into city gates at twilight, bells chiming and the air pierced by the smell of spices. Each place kept something of itself, and yet a stamped tile, a milestone, a bronze coin, a legal formula recited in a cramped office stitched them all to a larger pattern. Rome's art of persistence did not mean it never changed. It was a system good at adaptation. The legion's kit evolved with enemies and terrain. The law answered new questions with carefully reasoned answers. Cities took on new shapes as wealth and faith shifted. Titles multiplied in the bureaucracy to meet new tasks. Even the language of power adjusted, with emperors learning when to be seen and when to be rumor, a whisper in the marble, a figure on a coin, a law read aloud in a provincial town that never expected an emperor's footfall. The empire did not freeze time, it managed it. You might say, what of other empires? The Persian empires that strung the world along royal roads before Rome laid a stone? The Han Chinese whose bureaucracy and technology rivaled anything Rahman? The Mongols whose horses stitched continents together faster than any legion could march? The British Empire whose global reach dwarfed Rome's seas? Each of these holds a claim, a brilliance in administration, in speed, in scale. But Rome's claim is singular in its intimacy. It inhabited daily life so thoroughly and so early in the record of states that its habits became our assumptions, that law should be written and predictable, that infrastructure is a public good, that citizenship can be extended, that urban life is a partnership between government and governed. Rome is not simply a ghost we study. It is a skeleton we still walk around in. Step into a Roman courtroom again and listen to the argument, not the heat of it, but the structure. A thing done, a harm perceived, a rule applied, a conclusion reached, an appeal made. The idea that disputes should travel through reason is a Roman inheritance. Now turn to a bridge. Its arch is not only physics, it's a philosophy that you can shape the world to your plans if you are patient, precise, and communal in effort. Look at a map's clean lines. They are not only geography. They are a state's will to see and be seen, to measure, record, and maintain. Rome taught the world the art of the ledger. We return to the road where we began. Look closely at the stones. Cut to fit, laid to last, crowned for runoff, repaired and repaired again patches that are honest about time. A Roman road is a confession. We are mortal. Therefore, we must build for the future. That is the core of Rome's greatness. It assumed continuity and then worked relentlessly and often tediously to make continuity real. Its triumphs were not only the sharp exclamation marks of conquest. They were the long, unglamorous sentences of administration tallies, inspections, appointments, repairs, the appointment letter, the stamped seal, the patient audit. Now imagine the empire's twilight in the west. The city of Rome itself, once the mouth of the world through which everything flowed, thins with a new kind of quiet. The Senate still meets. Edicts are still written, but armies now loyal to local paymasters patrol. And kings with Roman titles speak languages learned from mothers who never saw the Tiber. The aqueducts that climbed, the hills are cut in war, and Rome the city shrinks into neighborhoods around the living water. Even in this decay, the idea persists. A bishop preaches in a basilica that used to house civic business. The Latin of law becomes the Latin of prayers. The old roads guide a new kind of pilgrimage. The empire's body fades. Its soul migrates into institutions that will bear its memory onward. Centuries later, a lawyer in a medieval town copies a legal text whose words were forged when marble was fresh. A king across mountains pretends at Roman pomp to clothe his authority. A scholar reads a poet who sang of arms and a man and finds himself thinking in Roman cadences. An engineer measures a span and trusts an arch because somewhere in the family of human knowledge, a Rahman showed him it would hold. Even now, when we say Senate or Forum, when we speak of citizenship, when we trust a contract or lay a road or repair a sewer and call it public service rather than charity, we are speaking Rahman. So we arrive at the answer as plainly as a milestone names the miles. Rome was the greatest empire because it treated power as an architecture. It did not only fortify borders, it fortified expectations. It taught countless peoples to live inside a framework that outlasted the framework's makers. It made a world in which a person who had never seen the capital could still feel the state's promise beneath his sandals. It crafted a habit of life legal, practical, infrastructural, that became the bedrock of later civilizations. And though the empire changed, split, and fell in places, its skeleton held. We are still, in many important ways, citizens moving along its bones. Before we part, look once more at the road. You can stand on it today, not as a tourist only, but as an inheritor. The stones are worn smooth where countless feet have learned the same lesson, that durability is a virtue, that the common good can be engineered, that the dreams of a city can become the habits of the world. If that stirs you, carry it with you. And as you do, remember to subscribe and tell me in the comments which corner of history you want to walk next. A pharaoh's tomb, a step under hooves, a fleet in monsoon winds. The path is long, and stories, like roads, are better when shared, yet the road is not an ending. It is a quiet thread, and if you follow it a little farther, it leads you back into the living city that wove it. Imagine that city at dawn. Rome breathes mist into the Tiber's pale air. From the Aventine, light spills over rooftops of tile, over courtyards and gardens, over the pale ribs of aqueducts stepping across the valleys like steady giants. In a stall beneath an arch, a baker slides flat loaves into a broad oven, their edges blistering, their scent traveling into streets where water gurgles from spouts shaped like lion heads. A child runs a hand along the cool curve of a column, then steps back to hear it hum softly, a bottle of sound when the street vendors call. The city comes awake, as it has for centuries, warmed by the same habits, steadied by the same stones. This is a story of why Rome was the greatest empire, and to show it, we will not only name battles or emperors. We will sit beside the people who made it great, without ever seeing their names carved into marble. We will walk with builders and surveyors, jurists and clerks, legionaries and quartermasters, midwives and merchants, translators and teachers, and by the end you will know that Rome's greatness is not a single firework in the sky, but a lantern that never forgot to be refilled. First, the builders. With dust on their arms and chalk lines across their knuckles, they did something other empires had not done at such scale. They made the earth cooperate. Watch a surveyor on a country road west of Capua. He sets a chromophore weighted lines crossing at right angles into the ground, then peers along the plumb bob to align a straight course across uneven fields. He is not a poet, yet he draws a line more elegant than verse, a road as deliberate as a thought. Behind him, gangs of workers cut down to firm soil, pour layers of rubble, gravel, and stone, each tamped, each angled so water flees the center for the ditch. They do not aim for the shortest path alone. They aim for a road that will outlive them. The final stones, polygonal, pressed so tight that weeds must beg permission, are polished by sandals and wheels. When the road is finished, it does not simply connect point A to point B. It connects minds. Traders begin to count time by milestones. Couriers from the imperial post, the cursus publicus, can swap horses at way stations and carry sealed orders from the emperor across mountains and deserts with the certainty of sunrise. A road teaches you to expect an answer. Now the water. Rise up with the aqueduct on its first stride. It is not a bridge, not exactly. It is a promise that clean water will arrive where it is least likely to go on its own. From a spring in the Sabine Hills, the builders coax a channel along a measured fall too steep, and the water chews the stone. Too shallow, and it sulks in stagnation. It crosses valleys on arches, dives underground through hills, appears again in a glistening arcade at the city's edge, then empties into settling tanks where silt can sleep. From there, lead pipes yis lead, because in their day it was common smooth, and easy to bend carry the water to baths, to fountains, to homes with the status to claim a private tap. In a city of hundreds of thousands, the aqueducts do not merely keep thirst at bay. They cool the day, wash the streets, quiet the dust, and turn bathing into a social contract. A Roman citizen can wash away the morning's heat, argue politics in the Tepidarum, and feel that the state has come all the way to the edge of his skin. Clean water is an intimacy between people and government, and Rome understood that intimacy. If roads and water are arteries and veins, the heart is law. But law here is not a hammer. It is a set of habits coaxed into sentences, and those sentences whispered into books, and those books placed into hands. In a basilica shaded by coffered ceilings, a jurist named Gaius sets down a framework to teach students what has, in effect, already been coursing through the empire's body. He writes of persons and things and actions. He explains contracts, property, wills, guardianship. He says, in so many words, that there is a way to be human together that does not depend on the whims of a single man. Rome did not invent justice, but it invented the idea that justice can be packaged and carried, can be taught, can be appealed to. In the Forum, a praetor stands with his lictors and announces the edict for the year. It is not the thunder of a god. It is a set of rules, clear enough to be copied across provinces so that a man in Carthage and a woman in Colonia feel the same shape of fairness cup their hands. And when the law changes, as it always does, it does so with commentary, with reason, with the humility to fold new needs into old form. Citizenship glows in this legal light like a coin held to the sun. At first, tight as a fist, the citizenship of a city, jealous of its privileges, it begins to open. All eyes receive the rights of Latin towns. Soldiers from across Italy, then from beyond it, earn Roman names by service. A Gallic cavalryman adds a second name to his first, an echo of the commander who recommended him for the honor. His son, born within the purple boundary of citizenship, will never know what it is to be excluded from a census. In time, the Emperor Caracalla opens the doors wider still, with a decree that makes citizens of free men across the empire, binding tax obligations, but also rights into one ring. The power here is quiet. When you ask people to share taxes, you must also share the protection that their taxes buy. A citizen can appeal to law, can own property, can pass it on to children, can be shielded from torture and crucifixion, can carry the dignity of belonging. Rome taught millions to think of themselves, not only as Phrygians, Thracians, Numidians, Britons, but as something more capacious, Romans. None of this moves without the legions. Not as rampaging beasts, but as disciplined animals domesticated by duty. Watch them pitch camp at twilight. It is as automatic as breathing. A rectangle traced on the earth. Ditches and ramparts cut and piled. Tents in ordered streets. A place for the general's tent. A place for the tribunes. A place for the standards eagles that are not simply symbols, but the presence of the legion's soul. Fires bloom in assigned spots. The smell of porridge and garlic rises with the murmur of low talk and whetstones on iron. A centurion passes, vine staff under his arm, eyes taking measure of order and exhaustion alike. He will drill men tomorrow, not because he loves shouting, but because a line that holds is a life raft, and you repair a raft in good weather. Rome's armies are bundles of smaller, clever things. The gladius, short, and suited for the tight work of a shield wall. The pilum, engineered to bend on impact so that an enemy cannot easily throw it back. The auxiliary cohorts, recruited from the empire's edges, who bring with them local genius slingers from the Balearics, archers from Crete and Syria, horse from the German forest stitched into the legion's cloth without being allowed to fray it. And there is the logistics, animals led by patient hands, wagons that creak because the grease is almost gone, salted pork and sacks of grain portioned with a fairness that makes men trust their officers. A legion draws a line on a battlefield, yes, but it also draws a line of reliability through a province. Bandits notice. Farmers notice. Merchants sleep better. What about money? Hold out your hand and a coin sits in your palm as if it has always known you. A face looks up. Augustus, Trajan, Antoninus, ringed with letters that name authority and time. On the other side, a goddess stands, or a figure embodies a promise. Peace, victory, justice, the Annona that feeds the city. The coin is heavy enough to be believed, familiar enough to cross borders without an introduction. A man in Antioch takes it because a woman in Corduba will take it. A woman in Corduba takes it because a tax collector in Mediolanum will take it. And the tax collector in Mediolanum takes it because the state that minted it will accept it back. This circular trust is an invisible aqueduct of confidence, and Rome kept it running, even when emperors shaved the silver, even when prices bucked in restless years. With coin and contract, markets unfurled, guilds ringed around their altars, ports thick with cargo lists, warehouses smelling of oil and resin. Grain from Egypt slides into the belly of Rome like a tide. Wine runs uphill, a trick of trade. Stand with a grain ship off Ostia when the sea is kind. Sails swollen, ropes singing. The captain watches gulls stream toward the harbor like white commas in a sentence almost finished. He carries the food of 1,000,000 mouths wheat grown on the black silt of the Nile. He carries, too, the habits of counting and weighing, documentation and receipt. In the harbor, cranes swivel, dockhands shout, and make jokes that have been told since boys were men. Naviculary ship owners stamp tablets and swear oaths. Somewhere above in the city, a clerk adjusts a number. "The dole will be covered for another month," he writes. It is a small sentence and the basis of quiet. Rome understood that bread first, then gains, but the bread was the genius. The annona, the state's grain system, was a practical theology. The gods bring the harvest, yes, but the state brings it to your bowl. The city itself, beyond its feeding, lived like an orchestra of stone. Hear the forum at midday. Not a roar, but a layered hum. Advocates in white togas moving like fish against the current, their words precise and weirdly beautiful. Shopkeepers rolling up awnings against the sun, their gestures efficient. Senators crossing under the gaze of statues, their sandals making a civility of sound. There is laughter by the fountain, murmurs under the basilica's shade, a burst of gossip near the jewelry stalls. A poet sits on a step and watches a boy teach his dog to lie down with a hand signal. He notes the detail for a line later, because even in Rome's greatness there is room for salt and flesh. In the afternoon, the baths fill. Water gurgles through bronze mouths. Bathers move through heat and cool, steam and air, like people stepping through seasons. A masseur works oil into a sore shoulder. A teacher meets a student and quotes lines as if memories were coins to be passed back and forth. A pair of traders, naked and unconcerned, agree on a price for a shipment of kill-fired tiles. Privacy is rare. Civility is not. Rome did something else that appears smaller than it is. It took languages by the hand and walked with them. Greek, the language of philosophers and doctors, of merchants from the Aegean to the Levant, did not have to kneel. It sat beside Latin. It taught and learned. In the West, Latin led, but was not one Latin. It was spoken differently in North Africa than in Gaul, in Hispania than in the Po Valley. Latin rolled into dialects the way a river braids before the sea, and later those braids would become French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Romanian languages that still hold Rome's breath in their lungs. In the East, Greek medicine treated Latin soldiers. Greek schools taught Roman boys. Greek myths nestled into Roman temples beside Italian gods. And no one had to pretend that identity is a single thread. This bilingual, bicultural habit made the empire flexible in the joints. It could speak in 2 tongues and listen in more. The empire lasted because it learned to wear many faces and still be itself. Consider a market day in Lugdunum Lion, where a man from the Ardennes brings heavy wool, a woman from Massilia brings oil, and a potter from Nemausus stacks amphorae like sleeping geese. A magistrate posts edicts on a wooden board. They are written in Latin, in letters so clear that a boy copies them with a stick in the dust. But in the stalls, the bargaining slides into Gaulish, Greek, sometimes a patter from a place the magistrate cannot place. Soldiers pass, their boots loud on the stones, but they are not from Italy. They are from the valley and the hills, locals who earn citizenship with each march. The standard they carry, an eagle for the legion, a vexillum for the cohort, does not erase who they were. It adds to them who they now are. Rome did not insist people be Romans first in their hearts. It insisted that when the state called, they would be Romans in their hands. It is tempting to make greatness a list, this many miles of roads, that many aqueducts, so many legions, such and such coinage. But Rome's greatness was not only scale, it was rhythm, the rhythm of tax collection that did not flay, of administration that did not reinvent itself every morning, of governance that could absorb a weak emperor without collapsing, of provincial elites invited into the imperial project with offices and honors and responsibilities. Watch a young man in Batika study rhetoric, then take up a place in his city council. Watch him manage water rights, oversee repairs to a temple, send a delegation to the governor with dignified complaints and reasonable petitions. Watch another in Bithynia write to the emperor about how to handle a fire brigade and receive a sensible answer from a busy man who still finds time to weigh local needs. That correspondence, archived on tablets, is a rope thrown across distance so that a city by the Black Sea can feel a pressure in Rome's hand when it is necessary and freedom when it is not. It did not always work smoothly. Nothing that lasts does. There were famines and floods, fires that ate neighborhoods whole while bucket lines failed and people watched the shadows dance on their walls. There were emperors who were not emperors in anything but name, civil wars that startled the streets with a sudden absence of certainty, plagues that pulled the thread of life out of families and left it coiled on the floor. But here is the other part of greatness, the ability to admit injury and scar. After the chaos of the 3rd century, when soldier emperors rose and fell like waves in a storm, when coinage corroded and borders buckled, a man from Dalmatia named Diocletian pulled the empire close to the fire and warmed it back to health. He did it not by nostalgia, but by innovation, by dividing responsibilities in a tetrarchy, by pricing, by refitting the tax system onto land and the people who worked it, by admitting that the job had become too large for one pair of hands. Under Constantine, a new city took the imperial name and watched over the Bosporus with eyes lined in sapphire water. Administration thickened, yes, and the court acquired ceremonial weight. But administration and ceremony, those slow, dense things, are how fragile bodies endure. On the frontiers, Rome drew lines not as scars, but as eyelids, opening and closing as needed. Hadrian, that roving scholar of an emperor, walked the edges of the world he governed and decided that the empire did not need to be larger to be great. He traded reach for grip. In Britannia, a wall of stone and turf spans hill to hill, not to keep out all that is beyond. The Picts sprang like grass over stone, but to mark a place where Rome could regulate movement, gather customs, and ease the friction of difference. In Germania, along the Danube, in the deserts of Syria, forts and watchtowers blink signals like a beadwork of eyes. Traffic passes, traders with packs, families with goats, envoys with their tidy phrases and folding chairs. Sometimes enemies test the line, and sometimes the line breaks, and then is stitched again. The empire's skin was not without wounds. It healed because the body underneath still had blood and breath. If you follow the postal riders, you will see another reason for greatness. At a mansion along the road, a relay station, modest but orderly, a boy washes a harness while a woman tallies oats. A cart creaks in with a sack of wax tablets and a sealed leather packet with a ribbon of purple at its throat. A rider dismounts, hands it to a clerk with eyes like a calm animal, and within the hour another rider, fresh and smiling despite the dust, is gone east with the same packet tucked under his arm. Messages move. Not rumors alone, not just the soft news that blows through markets like warm wind, but orders for legions, permissions for aqueduct repairs, condolences, instructions on how to manage a temple rebuild, judgments about a suit between two cities over a boundary and its taxes. A state that can move information more quickly than its competitors can decide more quickly. A state that can decide more quickly is more likely to recover from mistakes. Rome had its share of mistakes. It also had writers. If you listen in a schoolroom, you will hear the civilizational hum that underlay the clang. A teacher traces letters on a wax tablet with a stylus, and the children follow. A, B, C. Sounds tumbling into syllables. Syllables into words. Words into little speeches that teach them the tricks of persuasion. The point is not merely to make orators. It is to make citizens who can argue without breaking the table. Rhetoric in Rome was not just a way to win. It was a way to belong, to make your case to the powerful and to the people at once, to stand in the forum and be more than a voice raised above the crowd, to be a voice with shape. The teacher also drills moral maxims, sometimes with a twinkle, sometimes with the flat seriousness of a man who knows how fragile a city is if its people forget courtesy. What then is the best, he asks. To be wise and to act. The class repeats it with the easy cruelty of children who will grow up to learn its weight. There is another kind of school. Workshops where craft is taught by touch. A mason lays his palm against travertine and tells his apprentice to feel the difference between a good stone and a stubborn one. A glazier shows how to breathe into molten sand until it blooms into a bubble that can be coaxed into a cup or a vial. A shipwright listens to the sound of an adze biting cedar and hears whether the blade is sharp or needs a kiss from the whetstone. These men and women, many of them free, some of them enslaved, some of them on the way from one condition to the other, make a city that is not only administratively great, but sensuously rich. And because contracts work, wages get paid. Because law works, disputes are settled. Because roads work, orders arrive. Because aqueducts work, hands and tools are clean. Because markets work, there is profit enough to try something new. You can stand in amphitheaters and be marveled by scale and cruelty both. You can stand in theaters under painted ceilings and be marveled by music and comedy. But if you want to see a glimpse of greatness without blood or applause, stand at dusk by a small shrine at a crossroads. A family sets a little dish of food, a sip of wine, a garland, and murmurs to their household gods Lares who are not jealous but companionable. They thank the spirits for a day of safety, and they ask that the street remain kind. In this small ritual is the essence of Roman ordinary, the binding of daily life to a sense that the world is a shared table. That sense made possible the taxes they paid without resentment. It made possible the service they rendered when called. It made possible the social bargains of baths and bread and streets. An empire is not sustained by triumphs alone. It is sustained by millions of unremarkable gestures that confirm, night after night, that life is livable. This story is not blind. There were shadows. Slavery was a fact, woven into the economy and into private life. There were manumissions and rights for freedmen, but the wound remained. Conquests could be brutal, provinces bled by corrupt governors until honest ones came. There were times when the games were a bribe, not a joy, when senators murmured consent out of fear, not agreement. Greatness is not the same as goodness, and Rome was not always good. But where other empires burned through their own fat and fell into ash, Rome built structures that could hold weight. It developed durable ideas, that roads should be public, that water should be clean, that law should be legible, that citizenship should be something greater than a military pass, that culture can be a braid, not a whip. These ideas outlived the men who devised them, the buildings that housed them, and the exact political shape that carried them. When the Western court dimmed, when the last boy emperor in Rome's line was set aside and a Germanic general held the real power, people did not wake the next morning and find the roads gone, the law evaporated, the towns dissolved. They woke in the same houses, spoke Latin in their markets, kept their baths if they could, paid taxes to a new master with receipts in the old forms. In Ravenna, in Arles, in Seville, in Carthage, scribes kept copying laws and letters. In Gaul, a council of bishops used Roman rhetoric to discuss Christian doctrine. In Italy, a man named Boethius translated Greek philosophy into Latin so that it could be read in a world grown narrower. Far away in Constantinople, emperors still wore purple, still received petitions, still appointed governors, still sent writers. The East would hold for a long time, speak Greek more and Latin less, call itself Roman and be right. In the West, a long conversation between Roman habit and new kings would make countries whose languages still bear Latin's fingerprints. Rome fell, as all empires do, by degrees. But in falling, it taught. If you need proof of greatness beyond ruins and romance, look at the things we still use. The calendar that measures your birthday owes its bones to Caesar's tidy vanity and the corrections of a pope who still counted months in the old way. The law that shapes your contracts and marriages, even if you have never read a Roman sentence, owes its concepts to jurists who decided that human relations can be understood and recorded without freezing them. The languages that carry your jokes and confessions and recipes are bubbled from Latin's throat. The cities you live in, streets and sewers, plazas and parks, descend from Roman confidence in public space. Even the idea of citizenship, which is bent and broadened and been fought over, has Roman metal in it. If an empire can become part of your mourning without asking permission from your flag, that empire was great. But let us go back one more time to the road. You are standing on a ribbon of stone that crosses an old land. The sun is lower now. The cicadas begin. In the distance, where the plain rises toward a line of low hills, dust is going up again, not a legion this time. Not a convoy, but a farmer bringing a cart home, children walking beside it, while they slap the oxen's flanks with the cleverness of children, who are sure they are helping. The road carries the weight as lightly as if it had been made for this alone, for returning. And perhaps that is the last thing to say about Rome's greatness. It made a world where people could return to a city from a campaign, to a market from a village, to a bath from a field, to a home from a day at work, knowing that the return would find something still there. The promise that tomorrow will not be a reinvented, dangerous place. This is the quiet empire. Watch a woman step out of her doorway and look at the sky, her hand shading her eyes in a gesture that has not changed. A neighbor calls her name. She answers. The words rise and fall in Latin's music. Somewhere, two men are arguing over a boundary with an energy that would be comic if it did not matter so much. The magistrate will hear them tomorrow, and he will look at their maps and their witnesses, and he will cite precedent, and he will write a judgment in a hand that makes the letters stand like little soldiers. The men will accept it. They will not love it, perhaps, but they will accept it. This acceptability, not of defeat but of conclusion, is the subtle virtue by which cities endure. You can leave the city now. Walk out the gate under the carved figures that pretend to watch you. Pass under the arch that announces the name of a man who gave money for the work and hopes to be remembered for it. Out here the road is bordered by tombs, each with its face toward the traffic, because Romans like to put the dead where they could greet the living and remind them that memory is a civic duty. Read a few names. You will find Greek ones and Iberian ones, Italic ones and invented ones, freedmen who shaved carefully and bought their plots and carved their wives' faces in the stone with more love than the sculptor could capture in marble. They smile with a stiffness that makes your throat tighten. The empire, in the end, was made by these small people and their small loves. The light is deep now. In a port to the south, sailors tie knots that their fathers and grandfathers taught them. In a fort in the east, a watch is changed as it has been changed at this hour for years. In a villa in Gaul, someone reads by lamplight a copy of Livy and marvels that history can be written like a river. In Africa Proconsularis, a boy learns to decline rosa, rosé, and rolls the sounds under his tongue as if they were candy. In a tenement near the Subura, a mother hums her child to sleep with a tune she says is Greek, but which has drifted into Latin years ago without anyone noting the exact day. In the palace, an emperor signs a document and then, perhaps, pauses to listen to the long, low noise that a city makes at evening when it remembers that it belongs to itself. He does not own that sound. He is its steward. There will be new empires. There will be others who build roads, move water, make laws, and find ways to fold strangers into a common cloth. but they will all seem, at least a little, to be speaking the language Rome taught them. Sometimes they will put words of their own into that language and improve it. Sometimes they will misunderstand. Sometimes they will rebel against it and find that they are still using its grammar. That is what it means for an empire to be more than a succession of rulers. It means being a template for the possible. Look down at the road one last time. Place your palm on the stone. It is cooler now. It holds night like a secret. If you listen very quietly, you can hear not the clatter of hooves or the tramp of soldiers, but the friendship of citizens one to another, to the law, to the place circulating. That hum was Rome's greatest strength. And that is why Rome was the greatest empire, because it made a world in which people could be together, think together, move together, disagree together, wash and work and eat and argue and sleep under a structure that did not snap each time it was tested. Greatness is endurance with dignity. Rome had it. If that sense of togetherness speaks to you, carry it with you into tomorrow, like a coin in your pocket or a line of verse on your tongue. Tell someone a small, good rule and follow it. Repair something that works for everyone. Teach a word. Give water. Walk a road and know you are not the first to do it. And if on some night you find yourself awake and wandering, remember that there are stones in the dark that lead you home. There is one more stone to notice, one more quiet surface warmed by long-vanished suns. It sits at the edge of a plaza where voices once braided themselves into a single low chorus. Step softly into the forum before the city has fully woken. The paving blocks are broad and cool. The basilicas are shadows. The columns look like trees growing out of marble soil. A boy runs messages for a scribe. A magistrate adjusts the fold of his toga. An old woman sells figs from a woven basket. It is the center of the world and also an ordinary square, both at once. That is part of why Rome was great, not only because it conquered, but because it turned the urgent into the everyday. Power made domestic, ideas made habitual. Listen to a case being argued under the eaves of a basilica, the murmuring hall where business and justice mix. Two men speak over a damaged amphora. The wine it carried has been lost. The jurist, patient and precise, traces the lines of an older law with a stylus on wax. He remembers the 12 tables, once set up in this very city so that law would be seen, not hidden. He recalls the praetor's edict, adjusted year by year to keep pace with life's changes. He does not lift a sword. He lifts a principle. If harm is done, a remedy must be found proportionate to the harm. If a promise is made, it must be kept. If property is to be secure, then rules must be certain. You can almost hear a cadence. What is mine, unless you have a reason recognized by all to make it otherwise. In those beats, you can hear a future speaking, a future in which contracts, inheritance, ownership, liability, even the status of a citizen and a stranger, are not the fog of strength, but the daylight of rules. Move along the edge of the square. A young advocate tests a new phrase. It will have a long life, good faith. He says it quietly, as if testing how it sounds when it leaves his mouth. Good faith, not only what is written, but what is fair. Not only what is demanded, but what is understood to be right between people. You can feel the net tighten, not to strangle, but to hold. Rome's greatness was not only the strong hand, but the open palm under it that received grievances and shaped customs into coherent law. You live in that palm more than you know. Its lines are the lines in your contracts, in your notary's books, in the way cities are planned and polities organized. Walk out of the forum toward a road. Let's choose the Appian Way, the queen of roads. Its stones are laid in a careful sandwich. Gravel, packed clay, thicker stones, the broad, flat slabs on top. Drainage ditches on either side carry away rain. Milestones advise you where you are, how far you have come, how far to go. It is an engineering poem whose meter is distance. Hosts are not far from its shoulders. Way stations are counted like the beats of a heart. Imagine walking it at dusk. The traffic eases. Wheels murmur, sandals sigh. The air cools. The road is sure even in bad light. A soldier walking home recognizes a camp miles ahead because of the smell of stewing lentils. A merchant recognizes a bend because of a cluster of poplars leaning the same way. The road teaches everyone something shared. A far village learns the same lesson as a great city. You are connected. And when people are connected, they cannot be strangers in the same way. That is another piece of Rome's greatness. Not just building roads, but teaching an empire to feel that the distance between two places is meant to be crossed. Step off the road into a town. A bathhouse opens its doors. Inside is water, grades of temperature, rooms for sweating, rooms for cooling, rooms for resting. It is a small republic of steam. A poet recites a few lines to a friend. A mason washes dust out of his beard. A fishmonger boasts that the catch was good today. A midwife massages her wrists. Boys splash and are shushed. No one asks who you are at the door beyond whether you can pay the small price. The architecture is vaults and domes, brick and concrete holding hands. The water came by aqueduct. Feel its weight in the conduits overhead, the calm, trustworthy flow. An aqueduct is a promise kept for miles. Across valleys, over arches that step so lightly, it seems a giant cross there at dawn. The water comes to you. Fountains spill permanently in squares, as if rivers decided to be urban citizens. It is hard to exaggerate the peace this gives, to know that water will be there today and tomorrow, that a bath is not a festival but a habit. Greatness is often stability worn as comfort. Rome wore it like a well-cut cloak. Stand by the aqueduct's piers and look up. The arch is a simple curve that solves a hard problem: how to carry weight without crushing what is below. Make one arch, then another, then another. Let the thrusts and counter-thrusts meet. Let the line walk across air. The arch multiplies itself into bridges and markets, into the vast, cool mouth of the Colosseum, pouring crowds inward and outward with ease. Into the Pantheon's great dome that takes the sky, makes a circle of it, and lets rain fall through an eye that watches marble in time. No one had made a dome like that before. Unreinforced concrete perfected by patience and experiment. Lighter aggregates toward the top. Coffers to shave weight. A base that takes the load and gives it to the earth. You could stand under it forever, listening to the little rain inside. And you might think, if a people can capture the sky in a room and make it gentle, what else can they contain and humanize? This is what Rome did again and again, took the immense and made it usable without making it small. Walk to the river. A barge nudges the quay. Above the city, beyond the river's bends, a harbor spreads. That hexagonal basin at Portus, cut with intention, geometry meeting tide. Warehouses line its edges, with tiles and amphorae and sacks of grain stacked so neatly you can hear a kind of music in the order. Along the Mediterranean skin, ships carry an empire's necessities: grain from the Nile's valley, oil from Hispania's groves, wine from Gaul's hills, marble from quarries whose names sound like specialized prayers. The sea that was once a chain of dangers is now, for a time, a chain of ports. They called it Mare Nostrum, our sea, not just with pride, but with the insinuation of stewardship. Patrols keep pirates in check. Lighthouses lantern the night. Breakwaters calm the harbor's throat. Your bread in Rome depends on weather in Africa and machinery at Ostia. And if that machinery breaks, the city feels it in a day. Knowing this, the state does not leave it to chance. The grain dole is not charity. It is the oil against which the engine runs. The Annona is a system and a promise. It welds the city to its provinces with hunger's solder, turned into policies and supplies solder. To keep 1 million people fed is not an accident. It is architecture, too, of logistics instead of stone. Now follow the sea lanes not out, but in, as news flows. An edict from a governor in Asia Minor. An inscription from a town council in Britannia dedicating a new altar. A petition from a centurion on the Danube seeking a land grant after long service. A complaint from a village about a tax collector who has grown a little too fat on other people's grain. The empire is a conversation in letters. Its walls are built partly of paper or papyrus, and the hand that writes is often careful and direct. This citizen writes in Latin, that in Greek. Still another in a local tongue that rides along in transliteration, trying to be heard in the capital's ear. Rome's greatness is not only the creation of rules, but the creation of paths for complaints, for appeals, for recognition. The edict from the Emperor Caracalla that grants citizenship broadly Constitutio Antoniniana speaks like a bell in the distance. You are not outside. You are within. The price is tax and service. The reward is name and standing. The map grows new colors not by erasing old ones, but by overlaying a new status. A Briton and a Syrian can shake hands and say, with different accents, the same word, civis. Let's enter a school. The master is stern but not unkind. He draws letters with a reed pen and then has the children copy them. A boy recites Virgil in a voice that makes the room and a little ship and a battlefield in a single stanza. A girl, eyes narrowed in concentration, counts on a board, moving pebbles in lines of place value. In a corner, a teenager experiments with a hexameter. Language is a common home here, Latin for those who will deal with the administration, Greek for those who will trade in ideas, in poetry, in philosophy, in the prestige of old wisdom. The empire learned from Greece and was not ashamed. It borrowed a god's face, a syllogism structure, a design for a column. It kept what worked and put it to use. A certain humility hides inside the appearance of arrogance, the humility to adopt rather than deny. That is how the empire grew in more than land by adding minds to itself. Leave the school and the city. Walk out and up to a frontier. In the reign of northern Britannia, a wall strides the hill crests, Hadrian's wall mile castle by mile castle, ditch and rampart, road and garrison. The stones are rougher than Rome's polished faces, but they are sound. A soldier rubs oil into his boots. In a small shrine nearby, a slab records a dedication to a local god, folded now into the empire's pantheon like a new friend at a shared table. At night on the wall, you can hear quiet. The empire bends the night to itself for a while. Patrols go out. Fires burn in brazier bowls. The wind speaks the old local language to the heather. The greatness here is restraint measured out across a wet horizon. A frontier is a place where you could make war, and sometimes must. But often you make arrangements instead. Tributaries and treaties, markets where you meet and exchange. Words that prevent spear points from finding work. An empire that learned to be patient lasted longer than one that only knew the edge of a blade. Further east, in the dust near the Euphrates, another frontier waits. Cities with palms and bright awnings, markets hung with textiles, traders who have come over mountains with bundles that smell of far forests and spices. The empire here is a shrugging coexistence with other great powers, a recognition that a line in the sand is not an insult when it saves the lives of thousands. Rome's greatness included the art of knowing when enough was for now enough. You can draw a boundary not only with walls and rivers, but with treaties and calendars. Schedule a meeting next season. Send an embassy with gifts. Accept that the world is large and cannot be entirely the measure of any one state. In the city again, talk to a doctor. He sets a broken arm with splints. He prescribes a regimen of baths and diet, not because he is a magician, but because he has seen what cools fever and what calms the stomach. Medical texts from Greece stand open on a table. A Roman casebook sits beside them, full of observations, practical and unadorned. Crafts move the same way. A builder explains a new lime mixture to a young apprentice. A glassblower makes a delicate bottle for perfume. A bowl that will somehow survive 2 millennia under a layer of ground and then surprise a modern digger with its intact shine. A shipwright lays out mortise and tenon joints on a keel and smiles because he knows how that joint will feel when it swells in water and locks tight. The Empire's greatness was 1,000 small perfections transmitted over time and space, made ordinary so that genius could be put to work every day. Walk now into a house. Not a palace, not a hovel, a middle place with a courtyard open to the sky. An impluvium catches rain. Frescoes on the wall carry color into afternoons. In the kitchen a pot bubbles. A mother checks her ledger. Oil, grain, fish sauce, salt. A father mends a sandal strap. A grandmother tells a story about a wolf and 2 boys to a child who has heard it many times and will listen many more because the telling is a ritual of belonging. On a shelf, a small statue, the household gods. They are not jealous. They are reminders. Light the flame, sweep the hearth. Keep the family's place tidy in the universe. Rome was not only Senate and legion. It was habit and ceremony tucked into the corners of rooms, where the breath of history is warm with soup. The state's greatness rested on countless rooms like this, rooms with the discipline of love in them. Across the courtyard, a slave pauses at the door, a tray in his hands. His life is a hard truth. Rome's greatness did not arrive unmarred. The machine ran on the labor of many who had no choice. And even as the empire taught the world legality and order, it accepted chains as normal metal. Over centuries, manumission offered paths out for some. The law recognized a freedman's status and gave it shape. Still, the shadow remained. Greatness is not innocence. That is part of the reason the lessons that survive are valuable. They are the things that can be kept without keeping the cruelty that accompanied them. A city that invented sewers that spared neighborhoods from disease and laws that spared contracts from chaos still allowed what should not be allowed. We remember in order to choose better and to appreciate that not all inheritances are equal. Step outside and look up at the calendar. It is a calendar you know without knowing you know it. Julius Caesar reformed it under cold Egyptian skies, counting the length of a year by the logic of the sun. The months you speak are the months he helped write. The leap day you take for granted is the small, clever hinge that keeps days and seasons from drifting apart. It is a kind of tenderness to time, to keep the year honest so that harvests and festivals meet when they should. Augustus would adjust it gently, the way you straighten a picture frame on a wall. The greatness here is consistency. To give everyone the same year, to hang days at the same heights for the whole empire, to let wheat and wedding and worship align, that is power as comfort again, power as rhythm rather than disruption. Walk with an engineer along a line that will be a new aqueduct. He carries a water clock in his head and a spirit level in his eye. He measures fall not in shouts but in degrees so mild that a drop of water would laugh, lazy, at how slowly it is asked to go. He chooses a route that saves effort more than it saves distance, because he knows that repairing a tunnel is harder than repairing an open channel. He chooses the correct mortar because he has seen what weak walls do in winter. He argues with a landowner who does not want the line on his property. He takes notes for the magistrate who will settle it. The empire's greatness trusted men like this with the slow work that lasts and gave them a system that could sometimes cut through selfishness to say, the public good is real and it matters. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough that water arrived. There is a night now when the city is both itself and something else. A festival. Lamps hung, torches carried carefully, processions, songs. The empire is a patchwork of gods and rites, but Rome's genius often was to set them in a row and let them continue. To bless a parade that had begun in another age under a different sky and to say, walk, sing. We will keep order around you so you can practice your order within. Later, it would also say, this God, this story, this new teaching Christianity will not only be tolerated, it will be embraced. it will become a bond beyond law or language. When Constantine chooses a new capital in the East, and when Theodosius sets a new orthodoxy, when bishops write letters that travel like edicts and monks carry books like torches that never go out, the empire is shifting but not ending. It is pouring itself into new vessels. The western half staggers. The roads are still there. The baths, sometimes broken. The great houses, sometimes burned or subdivided, sometimes gone quiet. But in a monastery by a river, a boy copies a text letter by letter, his hand steady, his ink dark. He does not know that in 1,000 years, people will thank him for keeping his sentence alive. He does not know that the Code of Justinian in the East will take Roman law and lay it out like a garden of principles, weeded and ordered, to be found later by scholars who will make it flower again in new fields. Cities where lawyers speak Latin to each other, because that is the safest way to be precise. Universities where the dust of the forum is resurrected as lesson and dispute and doctrine. The empire survives as law, as language, as habit, as a certain way of holding a city together. Walk to a workshop where letters are made, not with a reed and ink, but with metal and pressure. A printing press breathes a new rhythm through old words. The Roman alphabet has become the world's tool, its shapes carried into almost every schoolroom. The days of the week tick by with names that once belonged to gods and now belong to calendars. The months carry emperors' names like coins with faces worn almost flat. A civil engineer in the 19th century thinks in terms of arches and drainage and grade because someone showed him that water must be told how to behave and roads must be taught how to last. A constitutional framer writes in clauses and sections because he knows, whether he knows that he knows or not, that the safety of the people lies in clarity. He borrows Latin phrases the way a mason borrows an old stone res publica, habeas corpus, de facto, because they are smooth and strong and already shaped to carry load. Return, once more, to a commonplace day in the empire. The sun is not dramatic. It climbs, it warms, it passes. A fire brigade, the vigils, moves through an alley at measured speed, checking for hazards, carrying hooks and buckets and authority. A market inspector tests a wake against a standard. A road maintenance crew patches a dip. A clerk files an appeal in the correct place. A quarry team stamps an inscription on a block so that, centuries later, when someone finds it in a field, they will know which legion cut it and why. These are not the things that appear on triumphant arches. They are the things that keep the arches standing. Greatness, when it wants to endure, disguises itself as routine. At the edge of a remote province, a farmer watches a detachment of soldiers pass. They are not from his people. Their accents make him smile. One of them sings a tune from a coast he will never see. But the farmer knows what the soldiers bring, that the market will be safe this week, that the road will hold, that the tax collector will be persuaded to restrain himself, that the magistrate will sit in the hall on Thursday, and that he can go and speak, even if he is nervous, even if he is not eloquent, because the law is not only for those who can afford a poet. In the evening, he will tell his children about the strange helmets and the neat march and the bright standard that looked like a family's shame turned into a family's pride, an emblem of having joined something bigger than his hill. A traveler many months from home writes on a wax tablet by lamplight. He has made a habit of trust, believing that if he carries a letter of introduction and keeps his papers in order, doors will open. Most of them do. In an inn in Cappadocia, he shares a table with a man from Dalmatia and a woman from Alexandria. They argue about the best olives. They argue about the best weather for a sea crossing. They do not argue about the price of a room, because there is a posted rate and the innkeeper knows that a complaint will follow if he does not honor it. The empire's greatness taught strangers how to be known to one another quickly, by rules and tokens and rituals that require nothing spiritual, only a mutual agreement that tomorrow will be like today in the ways that matter. In a workshop shaded by fig leaves, A sculptor runs his hand along unfinished stone. He will make a copy of a Greek statue because people still want to look at those lines and think those thoughts. He will also carve the emperor's face, hoping, as all artists hope, that the likeness will be admired, and that control over marble might raise him a little above the ordinary. Across from him, a mosaicist presses tesserae into wet mortar, making a floor that will survive a dozen owners and 2 earthquakes. She chooses blues that will pretend to be water and golds that will pretend to be light. Beauty in Rome often pretended to be something it was not in order to remind people of what they loved. A sea underfoot, a sun always shining in an atrium, a god looking down kindly. The empire's greatness included this generosity toward illusion, not to deceive, but to soothe and to bind. In the courts, a judge hears a case that crosses borders inside borders. A Gallic trader and a Greek shipowner dispute over a cargo lost to a sudden squall. They agree to a form of arbitration recognized in both their cities. Witnesses speak in 2 tongues and are understood. Documents are presented in forms that differ only in script, not in meaning. When the decision comes, it is clear enough that both can live with it. The empire taught the world something difficult and necessary: how to share standards without erasing selves. It did it imperfectly, with force when persuasion failed, with a blind eye to injustices it should have seen. But it did it often enough that the habit took, and habits, when they take, outlive buildings. Near dusk, go to the Pantheon once more. The crowd has thinned. The oculus is a round, quiet eye. The walls, thick as fortresses, hold back noise and the city itself until you feel as if you have entered a cool pocket in time. Rain begins, and you can hear each drop as it enters, falls, strikes, and joins a small pool on the polished floor. The sound is like a kind of counting. Think of all the times this has happened. Storms in August, gentler winter rains, sudden spring showers. Each drop made its small claim on the world and then was absorbed. The empire was like that sometimes too. An endlessness of small acts, of daily obedience and daily refuge, under a dome that pretended to be a piece of sky. The greatness of Rome is often this: a shelter not only from foreign armies, but from chaos, from the effort of reinventing what should not need to be reinvented. Night deepens. Streets are not safe in all quarters. Plenty finds its thieves and emptiness makes the daring. But patrols pass in their rounds. Lanterns lean in doorways. Families gather in rooms where the open roof shows a square of stars. Tell yourself a story a Roman child might have been told, of a farmer named Cincinnatus, called from his plow to lead, and, when he had finished, sent back to his field without demanding a crown. Whether the story is history or lesson, it sets a standard, power that knows to stop. Tell yourself another, of a woman named Cornelia who, asked to show her jewels, shows her sons. It is a claim that worth is not always glitter, that legacy is sometimes the people you raise rather than the stones you place. These stories are the empire's soft laws, the ones that move hearts, the ones that sometimes pull the hard laws into humane shape. Centuries later, a road crew in a small European town will dig and find a Roman culvert intact, its stones fitted like trust. They will nod and keep working, and perhaps one will take a photo and show it to his child at dinner. Look what we found. The child will shrug, and then, later, think about it again and feel, in some quiet part of herself, that she belongs to a long, practical magic, to the idea that people can decide together how to live, and then write that decision down in ways that last, and then build it into their walls, and their water, and their words. There is a temptation, when speaking of greatness, to think in terms of exceptions of moments when a general stood on a hill and the sun made his helmet into a signal. Rome had those moments. There were eagles in the sky, and trumpets and astonishing crossings and speeches, and the sort of events that let sculptors fill marble with motion. But if you want to know why Rome was the greatest empire, stand not on the hill with the general, but on the street with the baker. He puts loaves into the oven each dawn. He counts money in a coinage that is good far away. He obeys regulations made years before in a building he will never enter. He knows, because he has always known, that water will come to his tap, and that the road will carry his cart, and that if the amphora breaks en route, there is a way to make someone pay who should pay. He will teach his child to write her name in a hand that would surprise a Phoenician, and delight a scholar in Bologna 1,000 years hence. He lives in a web that holds because so many strands are knotted correctly. Think of a word, habitus. The way one stands, lives, wears the world. Rome gave a habitus to a continent, and then to more than a continent. It taught how to dress a city with pipes and stones and rules and festivals and duties and pleasures, and how to keep it dressed when fashions changed. When the cuirasses rusted, the habitus remained. The shoulders set so that burdens can be carried well. The step measured so that a long road does not exhaust you before noon. The voice trained to speak to strangers as if a common table were possible. One last road before we end. This one is a minor spur, not a famous artery. A farmer and his daughter walk along it at sunset. The daughter asks why the stones are so even. The father says that soldiers built it. She asks why soldiers would make a road instead of fight. The father thinks and then says, because there are many kinds of victories, and one of them is arriving. She laughs and runs, counting her steps from stone to stone, from shadow to shadow. Behind her, the father watches and feels an old gratitude rise, one he cannot name. He thinks to himself that perhaps greatness is not what the history sellers say, not a story of thunder and banners, but a story of a child with somewhere to go and a way to get there. The evening air cools. A milepost wears moss. A fox crosses the fields and pauses to listen to a sound only it hears. The daughter jumps off the last stone and turns back to wait for her father. He catches up. They walk home. The road will be there tomorrow. The aqueduct will hum overhead. In the city, the court will convene and the baker will light his oven, and a magistrate will rehearse a phrase that will travel into future laws, and a poet will sharpen a reed, and a doctor will make a poultice, and a scribe will copy a line, and a soldier will write to his mother, and a mother will teach a word to her child. Quiet accumulates. That is what Rome did best, accumulate quiet that worked. It made the hum of 1,000,000 tasks into a single steady thing, and that steadiness outlasted the bronze, the marble, the names. You can sleep now, if you like, with the sense that the world beneath you has a plan to it. Not a perfect plan, not a plan without sorrow or wrong, but a plan that believes in roots and rules and rights that fit. The stones are cool and even. The water is patient, the page is ruled. The day has a shape. If you need an image to carry with you, take the oculus again, that circle of sky tamed by a dome. Rain falls through it, and yet nothing is ruined. The temple goes on being itself. That is a kind of promise, a kind of hope. And if you wake in the night and listen, you might hear the faintest sound of footsteps on an old road, steady and unhurried, going somewhere good.